So this panel is really looking at services, data, and digital transition, and the digital transition. And we're going to examine how LTE is changing the digital landscape. So far in Africa, we have about 50 LTE networks that are live and running. Most of them started in the 2012, 2013 timeframe, which means all these deployments are fairly young. We also have another 50 or so that have been announced. And so the real benefit of having these gentlemen on stage is really to understand what their experience has been with LTE, what sorts of challenges they've had to deal with, and the specific results that they have achieved so far. If you look at some of the data from WCIS, the projections are that LTE subscribers on the African continent would increase about 23-fold from 7 million, from the current 7 million. In about 2020, we should have over 160 million LTE subscribers. So the opportunity is certainly very significant. And so we'll dive immediately into trying to understand how LTE has evolved for these gentlemen, and we'll keep it at a very CEO type level. Tony, I would like to start with you and try to get a feel for the infrastructural challenges that you faced at Unitel in deploying your LTE network.
Yeah, thank you. Firstly, LTE, I think it's amazing that in Africa so many operators have deployed LTE already, so I think it's a great success and it shows the technology is being adopted very quickly, because LTE does offer a real alternative to fixed line, and particularly in the enterprise and the ICT, and listening to what Paolo had to say and the Honourable Minister had to say, there's a great opportunity for developing ICT in Africa. However, there are challenges, and from our perspective, I would say there's probably three main challenges we have. One is spectrum. There's always an issue with getting spectrum, getting the right quality of spectrum, and I think there's not a joined-up approach to spectrum across Africa, but also within the regulators. There's a new learning that has to be made. Secondly, I think this is the biggest infrastructure challenge, is transmission. Cost-effective and reliable transmission. And the third challenge, which is more general for data, and that is how do we deploy to those rural areas, so getting the coverage. So for me, LTE at the moment, our focus is in the big cities where we can address the enterprise markets. The opportunity is to grow our consumer market, but we need more effort in terms of handset costs, etc., and getting the right sort of applications for the consumer market. So infrastructure is about transmission, and it's about spectrum.
Okay, thank you. Jenny, how about in Namibia? What sort of corporate capabilities and skills have you had to develop to deal with these infrastructural challenges that Tony has mentioned?
I think, thank you very much for the question. I think the fundamentals of LTE for us, because I think we started one of the first LTEs in Africa. We started in May 2012. I think the foundations is actually, Tony already referred, which is linked with the transmission, that is international bandwidth. That is, I think, the first point that, and we started international bandwidth because we entered in the WACS, in the consortium in 2008. So really, really in advance, even to us to think to start to initiate LTE. Then, the second thing of the transmission, which is a very important component, then can we transmit and connect these submarine cables inside of the country? And we develop a partnership with the utility, and we are using basically the fibers over the power lines. And based on that, we are deployed these fundamentals in terms of this transmission. That is very critical. And we started even before LTE. So when we introduced LTE in 2012, submarine cable was already there, and we already implemented fiber transmission countrywide. This is some fundamentals that needs to start. Of course, then the backhauling to connect to the last mile to the site also needs to be in place, but this is a little bit more easy because even with microwaves can be resolved. So again, spectrum was the main challenge. Secondly, these foundations in terms of this transmission, it was really our main challenge at the beginning.
Thank you. Janie, in Vodacom, you guys have quite an extensive deployment already. I was reading that you have over 3,000 LTE sites. So in spite of the challenges that the two gentlemen have mentioned, you've been able to create quite a significant deployment, and you have over 2 million subscribers on LTE already. Can you comment a bit on how you have been able to be fairly successful with LTE so far?
Yes, thank you. We currently have just over 4,600 LTE sites up. So the network is growing very fast, and it's still growing at a very high rate, and that's clearly capital intensive. So we've spent in the last 2 years huge amounts of capital to drive us. Now we were in the fortunate situation that we could do that we could put 8, 9, 10 billion rand into the network year on year. But the challenges are still there. The spectrum challenge doesn't go away. The acquisition of sites problem doesn't go away. The right of way to deploy transmission, to self-provide the transmission, all those challenges are there, and if you ramp up your rollout, clearly those challenges become even more significant. The reality is that we had to do a lot of very clever things. The engineering teams had to come up with really innovative ways to try and use spectrum correctly, to make sure that frequency reuse is done correctly, we even dabbling in carrier aggregation to try and get the performance levels to where we want it to be. All within the constraints that we currently have on spectrum. We had to reform our own 2G voice spectrum to deliver LTE, which is clearly not optimal. We're still waiting for spectrum, and we don't know when we will get spectrum to properly deploy LTE or to continue our deployments. So we had to do a lot of stuff inside there, and then most importantly, while we did that, we couldn't impact our existing services. Because this is a knock-on effect. As you reform, you're going to knock on your 2G performance, and that might knock on your 3G performance. And clearly those networks are all rolling out as well. So we had to do a lot of work around that. We had to self-provide our fiber. Every trick that we could find to bring down cost, aerial fiber and so on, we've deployed to maintain our rate of rollout.
Thank you. Tony, in Angola, it looks like you have actually quite a bit of spectrum. You seem to have 20 megahertz chunks in 3 different regions. And so from the spectrum standpoint, you seem to be somewhat sorted in that regard. A question I wanted to ask was, now that you have the coexistence of 2G, 3G, and 4G networks, I mean, this leads to quite a bit of complexity. How are you managing that complexity of having 3 networks?
Firstly, I think we're much more aligned, so I feel I should move to this end of this couch. So, we have complexity in 2 parts. One in the commercial, how do you differentiate the 3 services? And firstly, from a Unitel perspective, we do not differentiate on technology, we differentiate on service. And we try not to put in the market 3G, 2G or LTE. We try and position our services around the quality, around what they deliver, which may be on a 4G network or maybe on a 3G network. In terms of technology, the complexity, yeah, it's hugely difficult because you're bringing new technologies into a market that doesn't have loads of technicians and people who are used to this sort of technology. So we have to train our own people. We set up an academy, for instance, to train our people. So we now believe we have an expertise within Luanda, in Angola, of 2G, 3G and 4G expertise of people. And of course, that is always developing. We rely on our vendors to provide support, of course, but we manage it on a day-by-day basis, and we are, it's like everything. We're trying to be innovative, and when you're innovative, you have to take a few risks, and we do take risks both in our organisation, but also in how we try things out. As an example of that is last year we deployed on a few sites only LTE Advanced. And we did that because we wanted to try it out, wanted to see how we could do it from an organisational perspective, but also to test it with our customers. LTE for us at the moment is very much something we're pushing as an opportunity for developing ICT and in the enterprise market and the small enterprise market. And again, listening to Paolo about the opportunities, IPTV in 6 weeks in the cloud, it's just amazing if we can do that. But you then have to educate your subscribers and your enterprise market. They do not understand what this new technology can bring. So the complexity is much greater than just technology complexity. It's commercial complexity, and also how do you educate and bring your enterprise and small enterprise customers with you on this ICT journey. And for me, that's the fantastic opportunity. As we see our consumer market starting to flatten off, the opportunities to grow in the enterprise and ICT markets.
Thank you. Miguel, let's talk a bit about devices, which is very dear to my heart because I sort of grew up in Qualcomm. What sorts of devices are you seeing or deploying in your market? And what are the requirements on these devices? For a lot of the up-and-coming LTE operators, they will need to get their device strategy right. That is the touch point to the end user. I'm just wondering how you're doing on your device strategy.
Okay. Our perspective about the devices and the network, sometimes we are in the discussion of the chicken and the egg. So should we, and I give you an example, should we roll out LTE in rural areas where people will not be available to buy a LTE device? Or should we focus more inside of cities, the LTE, and maybe where people are, the affordability to buy LTE devices? At this moment, what we can see in the last, especially in the last 12 months, we can see that the 3G devices, we call it a smartphone, let's call it a decent smartphone, reach a value of price very low, which is, for us, it's an opportunity to us even pushing more 3G in rural areas because it's possible, it's affordable to these rural people having access to a, let's say, the decent smartphone. And then we can start to basically provide Ethernet accessibility in rural areas, which I think in 3 years back was not possible because the device was around $100. So in terms of LTE, we are seeing, and the smartphones are very important in terms of this, all of the network, because I think the majority of the customers will connect through a smartphone. Not for a computer, although a computer will use much more transaction than the smartphone. So based on that, what we are really even changing a little bit our strategy, we are now rolling out 3G in rural areas because of the devices, the availability of the devices. We are talking about at the levels of $40, which is even can be in some way be subsidized by us. And we still focus basically in urban areas to push the LTE.
Thank you. Janie, I would like you to also comment a bit on the device story in South Africa. You are a different market, more operator controlled versus the other markets which have this open market feel to them. I would like you to tell us a bit more about how you guys are doing on devices and also comment on the strategies that you are employing to migrate your customers from 2G and 3G to 4G.
Yes, so device-wise, we have quite a big penetration of LTE devices, as you said, over 2 million. Smartphones is a big chunk of that, and tablets as well. Probably about 10 times more smartphones and tablets than we have modems or routers in the network. The biggest challenge, as Miguel said, is the cost of the devices. As the cost of the devices come down, clearly it permeates throughout the networks automatically, and we follow that, so it's kind of like follow the money. But I think that what worked very well for us is to develop our own devices through the Vodafone brand. So we've got our own smartphones and our own tablets, and those are very cost effective and they're extremely popular. So 3G is going to be there for a very long time still. You know, we're probably going to have 15 years in the network, and that's going to drive the devices. So you'll always have this knock-on effect where 3G will probably for the foreseeable future lead at a cost price, but that also then pulls through into the LTE devices. Fixed wireless is a big application for LTE. Because typically the modems, you know, especially with good antenna capabilities, can be deployed in a fixed wireless environment and give very good speeds, within 60 megabits per second, or up to those kind of speeds. So the device strategy is working well for us on the fact that we can drive the cost down, and that's always going to be an issue as the chipsets become cheaper. So as Qualcomm brings the price down, and we can do that with LTE as well.
Thank you. Qualcomm is my former employer. Excellent. Tony, a little bit more on devices in your market. Are you primarily deploying an ISP type service with your LTE network, or are there other applications that you are looking at for LTE?
Well, firstly, I have to agree with what's been said about devices. I mean, for me, the growth of data, not just LTE, but data generally, is around cost of data, cost of the device, and the content. And the local content makes a big difference to how people use it. The cost of the device is really, really critical. And last year, we saw a massive increase in sales of smartphones, and we have our own smartphone device, branded device, which was the best-selling phone we've ever had. And it was because it's around the $70, sort of $60, $70 range. So cost of device, I think, cannot be overemphasized. It's got to be the right price point for people to go for it. But then you have to have the cost of data, of course, as well. As I said earlier, we are not particularly differentiating LTE and 3G services in the consumer market. What we are doing is basing on services, and I'd like to explain a particular service we've recently launched to just emphasize this. It's a music download application, and it's a prepaid download, so prepaid application. People pay $1.50, and for that they can download music, as much music they like, local content, international music, for a week. Now, what's unique about this is, one, it's prepaid, so you don't need credit cards, etc. So it's an Apple Pay, effectively, inside Angola. We launched it just before Apple Pay, so I think they copied us, actually. So, the application is called Kissom, and it's unlimited internet connection, effectively, in terms of downloading music. So we said to our subscribers, we're going to give you this. Now, there's Kissom applications, version 1 is music and etc. Version 2 is going to be a bit more sexy things, videos, etc. But the whole principle is, and therefore you need better data services, and that's when you start reaching into the LTE type services. But the key here is we are selling you a service based on data. Don't worry about the technology. We worry about the technology. We worry about how it gets delivered to you. We worry about the latency and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's a direction we wish to go down in terms of the consumer. In terms of enterprise, it's a different proposition, because enterprise, we are a fixed alternative, and we can provide reliable services instead of fixed, and therefore grow ICT. And I think it's our job to help develop the ICT market that doesn't really exist. It's very small penetration certainly in Angola, but generally across Africa. And for that, we have to provide redundant services, which we can provide on LTE as an alternative to fixed. We can provide new, sexy, cloud-based services to help grow that sector. So that's how I see 4G coming in to provide better ICT services for the SME. As far as consumers are concerned, LTE is just another delivery device, a slightly better video, or slightly better speeds, or whatever. And our services we sell will amplify that.
Miguel, in large markets like Nigeria, 3G penetration is still not above 30%, right? So our operators have deployed fairly extensive 3G networks, but the 3G penetration itself is fairly limited, and I find that seems to be the case in quite a number of African countries. However, we've gone ahead and started deploying LTE. What are the killer services that drove your decision to deploy LTE, and what are the real services that your consumers are taking up today?
Great. It's a long discussion, your question. First, just only to comment regarding with the 30% of the Nigeria in terms of what 3G reached there, and basically is what is reaching in all of the countries in the area. The spectrum that was allocated to 3G was around 2100. It was not really possible to implement it in rural areas. So 3G coming in UMTS 900 was started to introduce around 2008, 2009. But again, as I referred, I think, and in my perspective, the operators didn't invest so much in 3G in rural areas because of the price of the device. I think, as I referred before, I think the drop of the prices of the devices will, I think, change significantly. In our case, we have a target to reach 60% of our customers with 3G in the next 12 months, from around 35 to 60. So which will, and again, as I referred, we will in some way subsidize those new devices in terms of rural areas. Regarding with why we introduced LTE and what was the services that was pushing for us, the reason that we introduced LTE, I think in a very early stage, which as I referred, May 2012, it was inside of the cities the 3G reached some kind of saturation. In particular, what the customers were using, the computers connecting to 3G. And I think Tony already referred this opportunity. I think ADSL in Africa was not very well developed, which opened a tremendous opportunity to the wireless. And I think we captured that thing with the 3G. And at a certain moment, we decided that we saw our 3G network inside of the city is very saturated. And what we did, we pushed and we accelerated LTE. We immediately determined who are the customers that are using computers. It was our first customers. We contacted them, calls and visit customers. We basically gave them opportunity to try to have LTE. And it was the first customers that are migrated and alleviated significantly the traffic in terms of the 3G network, because it's not majority of the customers in terms of number of customers, but these computers, who are using computers at home, basically was really pushing a lot of data from the network. So our first aim was basically to alleviate the 3G network and reach or migrate the first customers that were using routers or dongles inside of a computer.
Thank you. Janie, it's extremely important in Africa that we don't deploy technology for the sake of it. We have limited resources on this continent, and the technical and commercial decisions that we make are extremely important and impact real lives. As a leader in this field, AfricaCom certainly is one of the key leaders or key leading operators in the continent. Can you comment on the current situation that you have? You have about 32 million subscribers. You have migrated only just about 2 million to LTE. What is causing this delay in moving more of your subscribers, especially from 2G to 3G and 4G?
Yeah, it's again the device. As people migrate automatically to newer devices that are LTE capable, they automatically switch over to the LTE networks. But you know, smartphones are very expensive, and customers have a long life cycle before they, especially if you get to the bottom of a pyramid, before they can migrate to 3G or to 4G handsets. So as quickly as the handsets come in and are adopted, they clearly switch over to the network. And we very clearly see the impact of that. For example, a customer that moves from the 3G network to the 4G network consumes about 300% more data. And that's a substantial amount difference. The South Africans of the audience will know there's a current conversation in the local press about people complaining their data is disappearing. The data clearly isn't disappearing, as they just consume it at a much, much higher rate. And the content providers are probably always one step ahead of us as network operators. The higher definition content is available. The YouTubes of the world will automatically stream a high-def video to your device if the network is capable. So as we move subscribers from the 3G network to the 4G network and the speeds improve, automatically the content providers see this and they start pushing higher resolution content. The devices themselves clearly create a huge amount of high definition and rich content, you know, and also the user behavior. It's not funny anymore to upload 50 photos if you've been away for the weekend and they're probably 4 or 5 megabytes a photo. So the user behavior is driving the uptake. So we're nearly in a situation where it doesn't matter how fast we make these networks, the content will fill it up. Already there are 4K handsets out. So today in South Africa, you can get better quality video on your handset, on your mobile handset, than you can get on the local broadcasting systems. So we clearly help us along with promotions, with campaigns to move people, especially from 2G to 3G and then from 3G to 4G as well. But you know, it's always for device price. So there's going to be a pyramid where you can see a smaller sector of a population will have high-speed devices. They'll be in the areas where we've deployed LTE, We currently cover about 48% of the population with LTE and about 98% with 3G. So as we can drive the devices through the stack, then people automatically move across, and then you see the benefit. So we've developed services that specifically take advantage, video services and music services and so on, that take advantage of higher speed networks. But there are so many content providers out there that are doing it in any case, that they drive this uptake, and you literally see this jump of 300% in usage.
Okay, thank you. Julie, next year we should have a chipset vendor up here, since most of the gentlemen are blaming devices here. So we can either go to Qualcomm or MTK or Spectrum and have them come face the fire here. Let's talk, finally, we have about 4 minutes left. Let's talk a bit about the future. Tony, what does the future look like for LTE in terms of the plethora of services and amazing performance that the technology promises? What do you see as the future?
Well, firstly, on the question you asked earlier, I think it's worth saying, it doesn't mean that LTE is not succeeding by having a slower uptake. I think actually there's a normal progression. A lot of our consumers are using data for the first time, and there's an education process. They don't understand what data is, and it may seem strange to people in the audience here, but there's a lot of people in the rural areas that can't read and write, actually. So using data is a new thing, and how to access those services. So I think it's quite reasonable to have 2G still, evolving to 3G, and then evolving to LTE. So you're always going to have that mix, and undoubtedly you're going to have a 5G mix as well in the future. For me, the big opportunity for LTE is in the ICT sector and delivering innovative services quickly to our customers, both in the enterprise market but also consumers, over a very reliable high-speed network. What do all those services look like? I don't yet know. But I think there's a fantastic opportunity in developing those cloud. And listening to Paolo, I'd love to see him. In fact, I'm going to challenge him to deliver IPTV in 6 weeks, because I can't imagine how you do that. So those sort of cloud services, if they're achievable, you're going to transform how people interact with their mobiles and how they interact with their devices. So for me, it's ICT is the big opportunity that goes to the SMEs, to the enterprise, and into our consumer base.
I think the situation in Africa, some of the realities that we have, you know, high rural population, there are areas where we have illiteracy. I think, yes, these are problems, but in the context of problems, we also have huge opportunities. I really can see operators innovating in areas like education, entertainment, healthcare, especially in rural areas. I think there's lots of room for innovation. I'd like to see some of the operators really moving in that direction and solving some of the specific problems that we have on the continent. Miguel, can you also give us your comments on the future?
I think the future is brilliant, and by the way, just only to mention that currently, after a little bit more than 3 years, LTE is it's generating more than 40% of the terabytes that our network is already processing. So if you want to count in number or percentage of the subscribers, maybe it's low, but if you see how much they are producing in terms of our network, it's relatively high. So it's more than 40% for us. It's very important. Regarding about the future, I think it's brilliant, LTE. But this challenge is brilliant because we can see this increase of usage, and basically you can see these highways opening where so many things can be connected in the future, from the IPTV or whatever, what kind of service that will come. I think the challenge that we have is, and we need to manage, is how can we monetize properly basically the accessibility of let's call it pipe. We will provide more pipe, more speed in more places, but how can we monetize that? That is a challenge that we have, but for sure I think the industry, is moving in a correct direction. The challenges are there. We are allowing OTTs to come. They will substitute some of our, let's say, traditional services, but I think we will find a way.
Okay. Janie, one of your shareholders, Vodafone, has been extremely innovative. It's done amazing things with AfricaCom in East Africa, and thinking that it will probably do some good things with you guys in in 4G. What are some of your comments in the more advanced South African market as far as what the future looks like for LTE?
Well, I think our biggest driver is purely our customer experience. So everything that we do, we build around that is the customer experience as good as possible. And that clearly means that we must have better networks, more reliable, with a better customer experience. So to drive towards that, we are aggressively rolling out 4G. But as we've all said, you cannot discount 3G and 2G. It is a multi-layer cake that you need to build. And clearly 4G Advanced is now coming along, which unfortunately put even more pressure on the spectrum conversation, but we need more spectrum that we can do carrier aggregation. We've launched voice over LTE quite a few months ago. It was very new. I think it was probably first in Africa and probably one of the first worldwide. And again, to improve the customer experience. One of the problems that you have with 4G or calling over 4G today is something called circuit switch fallback, where there's a really unacceptable delay in setting up a call, and you fix that, you get HD voice. So voice over LTE is a big driver for us. What's also coming, and this layered cake of frequencies and technologies will never stop. Wi-Fi is actually one of the big ones that come in, and we see that very closely tied to LTE. The technologies are the same, it's all IP, and you can do seamless switching. So we've done that as well. We've built a Wi-Fi offload capability, we've built voice over Wi-Fi capability, and we can do seamless roaming between 4G and Wi-Fi today. Handset support is the thing that's holding us back, not just because it's expensive, but because the standards are still coming out. We're still waiting for Qualcomm to define some of those. And that's how we will drive it. But really, at the end of the day, the customer, Tony said, the customer doesn't care on what services he is. He just wants instant gratification for his drug of choice, Facebook or whatever it is, and with no downtime, and of course at the lowest possible cost. So we need to bring all those factors together.
Well, thank you very much. The clock now says 4 zeros, and so it looks like we are out of time. I would like to say a big thank you to you gentlemen for sharing your specific experiences with LTE. You've covered some of the infrastructural challenges that you had in the beginning. You've talked about corporate capabilities that you had to develop in order to deal with these challenges, and then you've also given us a glimpse of the future. I think the opportunity certainly is very significant. All the analysts seem to be pointing in the direction of a massive uptake of LTE in the continent, and I wish you a lot of luck. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.